Hello, Bible readers. It is Monday, August 24th, and we are reading from Exodus chapters 35 through 37, and in Matthew, we're in chapter 17. This section of Exodus is about Israel's obedient work. I find it to be like when I think about old days, ancestors of ours. In my own history, I have part of my family on one side who came to the United States in the 1840s and 1850s, Norwegian immigrants. And when they came, uh, it's amazing to me, what did they do first? What, with the little that they had, what did they build? What did they do? And not just little as far as wealth, but their time was so valuable. I mean, there's not a lot of time to cut as much wood as you need and to grow all the crops. I mean, it was obviously a really hard life, and yet in the midst of settling an unsettled area and making a new life somewhere with very few people really, and very little support from a community. One of the things that almost every Norwegian immigrant community did was they'd build a church, and they would give generously to not only a building, but they would also give generously to try to get a pastor to serve them. And, they couldn't even always pay in money, but at least in providing a house and providing food for that pastor and his, it was always a him, his family. That kind of story, the stories we share about our immigrant ancestors, or even just a generation or two before us, when we talk about grandparents or great grandparents and the hardships that they went through in the Depression, for example, and would you be as strong if you were in such a situation? I feel like that's what this portion of Exodus is getting at, especially this chapter, which is every pastor's dream chapter of, you put out that capital campaign and you say, here's what we're trying to do, because here's what the congregation needs in order to really launch and thrive into the next chapter of our ministry together. And in this case, as we read from Exodus, they don't just get what they need. They don't just barely get what they need. They get so much that Moses has to tell everybody, hold on, just stop right there. We got enough. Our artisans don't know what to do with anymore. And so please stop giving to the building of God's temple. It's a pretty incredible story, but it's told to say, hey, those ancestors of ours that had such a hard time in the wilderness and who had these commands from God, look how they were generous, right? And if they could be generous in that time, how about us in our time? So that's how I read this part of Exodus. And as we go into the Matthew chapter 17, the Transfiguration is probably the most well-known story. Every year in our worship life, we have a Transfiguration story, either from Matthew, Mark, or Luke. And so I was going to spend just a little more time on this last part when Jesus cures this boy with the demon, verses 14 through 20. It's a story not about the faith of the father who's brought his boy to be cured. It turns really quick in this story to be a story about the disciples once again. And these disciples, Matthew wants to hold them up in a little better light than Mark does. Mark is very critical of the disciples. As I read here, the defection of the disciples, the betrayal by Judas, and the denial by Peter were all solid parts of the Christian tradition. Matthew never denied these embarrassing facts, but he does tone down the negative and even hostile picture of the 12 in Mark, which was based largely on literary grounds, blah, blah, blah. By adding episodes about Peter and by toning down the unflattering picture of the disciples drawn in the second half of Mark, Matthew balances things off and produces a more acceptable image. As we've already read Mark, I thought it might be important to know Matthew thinks a little more highly of the disciples. Their failures are, of course, something we can all resonate with. Like, oh, wow, they don't get it either, because I many times don't feel like I get it. But Matthew lifts them up a little more than Mark does. You might have noticed that already. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.